In this podcast episode, Ben Shapiro delves into the political landscape surrounding Kamala Harris's candidacy for the presidency, particularly focusing on her recent selection of Tim Walz as her running mate. The discussion is rife with critiques of both Harris and Walz, highlighting their political records, media portrayals, and the broader implications of their campaign strategies. The podcast opens with a satirical tone, emphasizing the perceived artificiality of Kamala Harris's campaign. Shapiro notes that it is day 18 of Harris's candidacy, during which she has faced no challenging questions from the media. This lack of scrutiny is framed as a deliberate effort by the media to present her as a joyful and attractive candidate despite her controversial past and policies. Shapiro critiques the media's portrayal of Harris, suggesting that they are more interested in promoting her than in holding her accountable. The term joy becomes a central theme in the discussion, as Shapiro contrasts Harris's campaign message with the darker realities facing the country, such as economic instability and foreign policy crises. Shapiro argues that the media's focus on joy is a thin veneer over the serious issues that Americans are grappling with, likening it to fake sugar that masks the bitter reality of the political landscape. The conversation shifts to Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, who has been selected as Harris's running mate. Shapiro expresses skepticism about Walz's qualifications and the motivations behind his selection. While the media attempts to frame Walz as a moderate and relatable figure, Shapiro points out his controversial policies, including tax increases and support for illegal immigration. He argues that Harris's choice of Walz is indicative of her alignment with the far-left elements of the Democratic Party, particularly in light of her decision to overlook Josh Shapiro, a more moderate candidate. The podcast highlights Walz's political record, noting that he has presided over a significant increase in crime in Minnesota and has been criticized for his handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. Shapiro emphasizes that Walz's governance has led to a population exodus from Minnesota, raising questions about his appeal as a candidate for national office. Throughout the discussion, Shapiro critiques the media's role in shaping public perceptions of both Harris and Walz. The podcast points out that the media often downplays the negative aspects of their records while amplifying their supposed virtues. Shapiro argues that this creates a distorted narrative that fails to reflect the realities of their governance and the challenges facing the American people. He also addresses the media's tendency to label Republicans as weird, while portraying Harris and Walz as relatable and down-to-earth. This double standard is highlighted through various examples, including Walz's comments about Republicans being creepy and weird, which Shapiro argues is a projection of their own shortcomings. The podcast touches on the personal lives of both Tim Walz and his wife, Gwen Walz. Shapiro shares anecdotes about Gwen's comments during the riots in Minneapolis, suggesting that her perspective reflects a disconnect from the realities faced by ordinary citizens. The discussion also includes a phone call between Doug Emhoff, Harris's husband, and Gwen Walz, which is portrayed as overly scripted and lacking genuine enthusiasm. Shapiro critiques the superficiality of the candidates' public personas, suggesting that their attempts to project joy and authenticity come off as disingenuous. This theme of inauthenticity is further emphasized through Shapiro's commentary on the candidates' campaign strategies, which are framed as attempts to cater to specific voter demographics without addressing the underlying issues that concern many Americans. As the podcast progresses, Shapiro delves into the ideological underpinnings of Harris's campaign and the broader Democratic Party. The discussion highlights the influence of the radical left within the party, particularly in light of the recent successes of progressive candidates like Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush. Shapiro argues that Harris's selection of Walz is a reflection of her alignment with these radical elements as she seeks to appease the party's left wing while attempting to maintain a moderate facade. The podcast also addresses the growing anti-Semitism within the Democratic Party, particularly in relation to the Israel-Palestine conflict. Shapiro points out that Harris's decision to choose Walz over Shapiro may have been influenced by concerns about alienating progressive voters who are critical of Israel. This dynamic is framed as indicative of a larger trend within the party, where traditional support for Israel is increasingly being challenged by a vocal leftist faction. In concluding the discussion, Shapiro reflects on the implications of Harris's candidacy and the selection of Walz for the future of the Democratic Party. The podcast suggests that the party is at a crossroads, grappling with internal divisions between moderates and progressives. Shapiro expresses skepticism about the viability of Harris's campaign, arguing that her reliance on superficial messaging and media support may not be enough to overcome the substantive challenges facing the country. The podcast ends on a note of uncertainty, leaving listeners to ponder the potential outcomes of the upcoming election and the broader trajectory of the Democratic Party. Shapiro emphasizes the importance of critical engagement with political narratives, urging listeners to look beyond the surface-level portrayals of candidates and consider the real implications of their policies and actions.